What happens when Britain's most beloved comedy genius sits down for what should be a simple morning chat, and instead finds himself face-to-face with a host who thinks she can tear him apart on live television. It only took 29 seconds for Lorraine Kelly to make the comment that would destroy her reputation and turn her own show into a battlefield she could never win. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios. Lorraine Kelly sat in her bright yellow chair, her fake smile already plastered across her face as she prepared to interview Rowan Atkinson. The man behind Mr. Bean, Johnny English, and Blackadder was there to talk about his latest project. Simple enough, right? Wrong. From the moment Rowan walked onto that set, something felt different. The usual warmth that guests received was nowhere to be found. Instead, Lorraine looked at him like he was some kind of circus act she had to tolerate. "Right then," she said, not even bothering to stand up as she approached. "Rowan Atkinson, everyone, the man who made a career out of not talking." The audience laughed nervously. Rowan smiled politely and took his seat, but you could see something flicker across his face. How didn't he crack in his usual calm demeanor? "Thank you for having me, Lorraine," he said, his voice measured and professional. "Oh, we had to really," she replied with a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "I mean, your people have been calling us for weeks, desperate to get you on, weren't they?" The first red flag. Rowan's eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, I do have a new film coming out, so naturally we thought your viewers might be interested." "Might be," Lorraine said, flipping through her notes with exaggerated boredom. "Though I have to ask, and forgive me for being blunt, but don't you think you're getting a bit old for all this physical comedy nonsense? I mean, you're not exactly a spring chicken anymore." The studio fell silent. Even the cameraman looked uncomfortable. This wasn't playful banter. This was an attack disguised as an interview question. Rowan sat back in his chair, his jaw tightening just barely. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "Oh, come on, don't play dumb with me," Lorraine said, leaning forward like a predator sensing weakness. "You're 68 years old. Isn't it time to hang up the rubber faces and silly walks? Leave it to the young people." "I wasn't aware there was a nudge limit on entertaining people," Rowan replied, his voice still calm, but with an edge creeping in. "There isn't officially," Lorraine said with mock sincerity. "But there's something rather sad about watching an old man try to be funny, don't you think? It's like watching your grandfather try to be hip. Embarrassing for everyone involved." The audience gasped. This was live television, and their host had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. But Lorraine wasn't done. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, clearly enjoying herself now. "Mr. Bean was what, 30 years ago? And it wasn't exactly Shakespeare, was it? A grown man acting like a toddler. What does that say about British comedy standards?" Rowan's hands were clasped in his lap, his knuckles turning white, but his voice remained steady. "Mr. Bean has brought joy to millions of people around the world. Children, adults, families, I'm rather proud of that. Are you, though?" Lorraine pressed, sensing she had him on the defensive. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a man who peaked decades ago and is desperately clinging to relevance. When was the last time you did anything genuinely funny? And please don't say Johnny English, because we both know that was just Mr. Bean in a suit." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Crew members were looking at each other in disbelief. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was character assassination. Rowan said quietly, "I came here to talk about my new project. Not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who thinks morning television makes them qualified to judge artistic merit." "Oh, artistic merit," Lorraine laughed, slapping her knee dramatically. "Listen to him, everyone. Artistic merit from the man who built his career on pulling faces and falling over." She turned to the audience, encouraging them to laugh along with her mockery. But the audience sat in stunned silence. They hadn't come to watch their childhood hero get torn apart by a bitter talk show host. "You know what I think?" Lorraine continued, turning back to Rowan with venom in her voice. "I think you're jealous of real comedians. People like Jimmy Carr, Sarah Millican. People who actually have wit and intelligence. People who don't need to resort to playground antics to get a laugh." Rowan's composure was cracking. You could see it in the way his left eye twitched slightly and how his breathing had changed. This man who had spent his entire career being gracious and professional was being pushed beyond his limits. "Those are fine comedians," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But comedy isn't a competition, Lorraine. There's room for different styles, different approaches." "Is there, though?" She shot back. "Because it seems to me like your style went out with Thark. Physical comedy is dead, Rowan, dead and buried. And the sooner you accept that and step aside for people with actual talent, the better off we'll all be. That was it. The moment everything changed. Rowan Atkinson, someone who had made the world laugh for 40 years, who had brought happiness to countless lives, who had never said a bad word about anyone in public, had finally heard enough. He sat forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Lorraine's face. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of professionalism and dignity. Talent, he said slowly. You want to talk about talent, do you? Lorraine sensed she might have pushed too far, but it was too late to back down now. Yes, let's talk about talent right then, Rowan said, standing up from the chair. The studio light seemed to dim as Rowan Atkinson rose to his full height, towering over the woman who thought she could destroy him with cheap shots and playground insults. Lorraine Kelly, for the first time in the entire interview, looked genuinely nervous. Sit down, Rowan, she said, trying to regain control of her own show. We're in the middle of an interview. No, Rowan replied, his voice cutting through thesalence like a blade. We're in the middle of an ambush, and I'm done being your victim. He turned to face the audience, his back to Lorraine, and when he spoke, every person in that studio hung on his every word. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in show business for over 4 decades. I've worked with some of the most brilliant minds in comedy. I've performed for royalty, for children, for people in every corner of this planet. And in all that time, I've never, not once, encountered someone so desperate to tear down another person's life's work just to make themselves feel important. Lorraine's mouth fell open. This wasn't the quiet, polite man she thought she could bully. Now hang on a minute, she started, but Rowan raised his hand without even looking at her. I'm talking now, he said firmly. You had your turn. You had 20 minutes to show everyone watching exactly what kind of person you are. Now it's my turn. He turned back to face her, and the look in his eyes made her sink deeper into her yellow chair. You want to talk about talent, Lorraine? Let's talk about your talent. What exactly is it that you do here? You read from a teleprompter. You ask questions written by other people. You smile on cue and pretend to care about celebrities you've never met. Where's the talent in that? The audience was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. At least when I pull a face or take a pratfall, I'm doing something. I'm creating a moment of joy for someone. I'm making a child laugh. I'm helping a tired worker forget their troubles for 30 minutes. What do? You sit in that chair and tear people down to make yourself feel better about your own mediocrity. Lorraine tried to interrupt again. I think you're being rather unfair. Rowan's voice rose for the first time. You just spent 20 minutes telling me I'm too old, that my work is worthless, that I should step aside for real comedians. You called my life's work embarrassing. You compared me to a desperate grandfather trying to be hip, and you think I'm being unfair. He started pacing now, his hands animated as he spoke. The physical comedian was gone, replaced by a man with 40 years of frustration finally pouring out. Do you know what Mr. Bean has done for this world? Do you have any idea? I've received letters from parents telling me they're autistic. Children spoke their first words while watching. Bean, I've heard from soldiers in Afghanistan who said my films helped them get through the darkest moments of their lives. I've met children in hospitals who forgot about their pain for an hour because of something I created. Lorraine was shrinking visibly in her chair now. Rowan, I think we should. But what have you created, Lorraine? What's your legacy? 30 years of asking celebrities about their new haircuts. 30 years of reading gossip off cards and pretending it's journalism. You sit there judging my work, but what work? Where's your creative output? Where are the things you've made that will outlast you? The cameras were still rolling. The producers were probably screaming in the control room, but nobody was brave enough to stop what was happening. You know what's really sad? Rowan continued, his voice dropping to that quiet, dangerous tone again. It's not an old man trying to make people laugh. It's a bitter woman who's so threatened by joy that she has to destroy it wherever she finds it. It's someone so insecure about their own lack of substance that they have to attack anyone who actually brings something meaningful to the world. Lorraine finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I was just asking questions. No, Rowan said, stepping closer to her desk. You were trying to humiliate me on live television. You thought you could take down Rowan Atkinson because you figured I was just a quiet little man who wouldn't fight back. You thought wrong. He leaned forward, placing both hands on her desk, looking directly into her eyes. Let me tell you something about comedy, Lorraine. Real comedy comes from truth. It comes from understanding people, from seeing their struggles and their joys and reflecting them back in a way that helps them cope with life. Physical comedy, the kind you mock so easily, is the purest form there is. It crosses every language barrier, every cultural divide. A child in Japan and a grandmother in Scotland can watch the same pratfall and both burst into laughter. That's not easy. That's not simple. That's miraculous. The audience began to murmur their agreement. They could feel the shift happening. The victim was becoming the victor. But what you do here, he continued, gesturing around the studio, this isn't about bringing people together or making their lives better. This is about feeding your own ego. This is about making yourself feel important by making other people feel small, and frankly, it's pathetic. Lorraine looked around desperately as if hoping someone would rescue her from this nightmare she had created. You called my work playground antics, Rowan said, straightening up again. Well, maybe that's exactly what the world needs more of. Maybe we need more playground joy and less boardroom cruelty. Maybe we need more people willing to look foolish if it means making someone else smile, and fewer people like you who think tearing others down makes them look smart. He turned to the audience again, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've been called a lot of things in my career. Silly, childish, simple. And you know what? I wear those labels proudly, because if being silly means bringing happiness to millions of people, then I'll be silly until the day I die. If being childish means remembering what it's like to find wonder in the world, then I'll stay childish forever. And if being simple means I don't need to hurt other people to feel good about myself, then simple is exactly what I want to be. The audience erupted in applause, not the polite, prompted applause of a morning show, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Lorraine sat frozen in her chair, realizing too late that she had picked a fight with the wrong person. The applause died down, but the energy in the studio remained electric. Rowan Atkinson stood there, composed once again, while Lorraine Kelly looked like she wanted to disappear into her bright yellow chair. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. You know what the real tragedy is here, Lorraine? He said, his voice now calm, but caring, and weight that made everyone lean forward to listen. It's not that you don't understand comedy. It's that you don't understand people. Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was completely out of her depth. Now when you mock physical comedy, when you call it childish and outdated, you're not just attacking me. You're attacking every person who ever found comfort and laughter during their darkest hour. You're dismissing every child who learned that it's okay to be different by watching someone celebrate their own quirks on screen. He walked closer to her desk again, but this time there was no anger in his movement. There was something far more devastating: disappointment. I've met war veterans who told me that Mr. Bean helped them reconnect with their families after they came home. I've spoken to teachers who housed my films to reach children who had given up on learning. I've heard from carers who said, my comedy gave them 5 minutes of peace while looking after loved ones with dementia. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. But to you, all of that is just playground antics. All of those moments of human connection. All of that healing through laughter. It's just an old man making faces. Do you see how small that makes you? How limited your understanding of what entertainment can be? Lorraine finally found her voice, though it was shaky and defensive. I never meant to suggest that your work hasn't helped people, didn't you? Rowan tilted his head slightly like a teacher correcting a student, because that's exactly what you suggested. You said my comedy was embarrassing. You said it was time for me to step aside. You compared me to a desperate old man clinging to relevance. Those were your exact words, weren't they? She nodded reluctantly, knowing that millions of people had just heard her say those things. And now, you're trying to walk it back because you realize you've revealed something ugly about yourself on live television. But here's the thing, Lorraine. This isn't about me anymore. This is about the kind of person you choose to be. He turned back to the audience, including them in the conversation in a way that Lorraine never had. We live in a world that's becoming crueler by the day. People hide behind screens to tear each other down. They mock anyone who dares to be vulnerable or different or joyful. They've forgotten that kindness isn't weakness, that bringing happiness to others is one of the highest callings a person can have. The audience was shanging on every word. This wasn't just a defense of comedy anymore. This was a manifesto for human decency. And then someone like Lorraine gets a platform, gets a microphone, gets the chance to reach millions of people every morning. And what does she choose to do with that power? She uses it to make people feel small. She uses it to tell a man who has dedicated his life to bringing joy to others that his work is worthless. Lorraine looked like she was about to cry. The makeup, that had looked perfect, at the start of the show was now smudged and uneven. But here's what she doesn't understand. Rowan continued, his voice growing stronger again. You can't diminish light by pointing out darkness. You can't make yourself taller by cutting other people down. And you certainly can't understand art by reducing it to your own narrow, bitter perspective. He walked back toward his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood beside it, one hand resting on the back, looking more dignified and powerful than Lorraine had ever looked in her own studio. Physical comedy isn't just about making people laugh, thought that would be enough. It's about showing people that it's okay to fail spectacularly. It's about demonstrating that dignity isn't about never looking foolish. It's about getting back up after you fall. It's about teaching children that being different isn't something to hide from. The cameras caught every nuance of his expression, every gesture that emphasized his words. Mr. Bean doesn't speak because he doesn't need to. His humanity shows through his actions, his expressions, his mistakes. He connects with people who feel like outsiders because he is an outsider who never stops trying. That's not childish, Lorraine. That's profound. Rain made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Well, I think we can agree that. No, Rowan cut her off firmly. We can't agree on anything because we don't share the same values. You value cynicism. I value wonder. You value tearing down. I value building up. You value making people feel bad about themselves. I value making people feel like they belong in this world. He straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. To anyone watching who creates something, who puts themselves out there to make the world a little brighter, don't let people like this discourage you. The world needs your art, your humor, your unique way of seeing things. Don't let bitter people convince you that joy is somehow less valuable than criticism. Then he did something that completely stunned everyone in the studio. He smiled. Not the polite, professional smile he'd worn when he first sat down, but a genuine, warm smile that reminded everyone exactly why they had fallen in love with his work in the first place. Thank you all for listening, he said to the audience. And thank you, Lorraine, for reminding me why I do what I do. Sometimes we need to meet people who've forgotten how to find joy in order to remember how precious it is. Without another word, he walked toward the exit. The audience rose to their feet, applauding louder than they ever had for any morning show guest. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were smiling so broadly it looked like their faces might crack. Lorraine sat alone at her desk, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. She had started the interview thinking she could embarrass a quiet comedian. Instead, she had been systematically dismantled by a master of human nature who had just reminded an entire nation what real class looked like. As Rowan reached the studio door, he paused and turned back one final time. Oh, and Lorraine, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. The next time you want to interview someone about their life's work, you might want to actually watch some of it first. You'd be amazed what you can learn when you approach something with an open mind instead of a closed heart. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like the final note of a symphony. The audience continued applauding until the producers finally cut to commercial, leaving Lorraine Kelly alone with the consequences of her cruelty and the knowledge that she had just been outclassed by a man she had tried to humiliate. The greatest physical comedian of his generation had just delivered the performance of a lifetime without pulling a single face or taking a single pratfall. He had used nothing but words, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in the power of human kindness to turn a vicious attack into a masterclass in dignity. And somewhere in the silence that followed, you could almost hear the sound of a career ending and a legend being